So I'm Keira Thomson and I live on the island of Yell in the Shetland Islands, and I recently graduated from Grey School of Art where I studied a BA honours in communication design specialising in photography. Most of my projects over the years have been about home, but more recently I've been focusing on mental health awareness through self-portraiture using experimental techniques like emulsions, collage and alternative darkroom printing. And before talking a bit about the piece I have on display as part of FUTUREPROOF, I thought I'd look back at some of the projects that led up to it, as well as some of my inspirations along the way. So in my first year at Gray's in 2020, I did a project called Obscured, where I used various methods to obscure my face using various techniques. And I manipulated the images using various techniques. I started experimenting with Polaroid film destruction inspired by artist Lucas Samaras, and eventually, after further research, I looked into the work of some other artists such as Rhiannon Adam, and I discovered the technique of Polaroid emulsionless. Essentially, cut open the film, separate the layers, and then carefully remove the emulsion, the part that holds the image, in warm water before transferring it to paper. And I fell in love with the process because it was so unpredictable. No two results were ever the same, and I eventually figured out how to do emulsions from digital images using water slide paper. And then, inspired by Taylor Jones's photo project, Dear Photograph, I used this technique in my final project, Nostalgia, where I used old family photos taken by my mum as the basis of my work. I followed in her footsteps, returning to the family photos locations and taking new ones from the same vantage points. And to creatively combine the past and present, I made emulsions from the old images and then layered them over my new ones using Photoshop. And I also wrote some poetry about my childhood and Shetland dialect to accompany these images, and I compiled everything into a book. And in my final year at Gray's, I decided to expand on my Obscured project, and I called my new project See, Hear, Speak No Evil, which is an expression that references ignoring wrongdoing. And I wanted to create thought-provoking work to make people think about how their words may affect those around them. So I incorporated my handwriting into some of my work, demonstrating negative phrases that people sometimes say to others, such as "it's all in your head" or "you should smile more." And I did some sewing in a couple of my pieces, including the work that I have on display as part of FUTUREPROOF at street level. And it's called Mixed Emotions, and it's a hand-stitched collage inspired by artist Annegret Solto. And the meaning behind this piece was that as humans, we aren't perfect. We experience a wide range of positive and negative emotions, and there may be situations beneath the surface that people are unaware of. So this piece was intended to serve as a reminder that everyone has the right to express themselves freely without judgment. And then here are some images of my work in the gallery. And I wanted to thank Street Level again for inviting me to be part of this talk and exhibition. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Sue Whittingham. I recently graduated in 2022 from Orkney College through the University of the Highlands and Islands with a fine art degree, honours degree, and that's me. The title of my project became Here, This is the Place, with the subtitle Recalling Echoes of a Whispering Landscape. And it really chronicles my journey, a circuitry walk up the hill of Bingaffey on the island of Hoy, where I live. And that became quite significant for me, as the whole of level 4 was spent pretty much in lockdown when ferries stopped sailing, and this became a daily walk for me, where I followed sheep tracks and mountain hare to a lone rusty stake not far from a satellite tower, which was pretty much the halfway point. So, to start the whole thing off, I started to create a series of journals to record ideas and inspiration, thoughts about how I might progress my degree show work towards the final installation. This has become a process of ongoing reciprocal dialogue in collaboration with poetry writing and sculptural installation. My camera I see very much as an extension of myself. Much of the images that I take are instinctive, and this is where it all started, really. A beach find, a serendipitous find on the beach. A broken pot, portobello stoneware pot, was in fragments. And I felt compelled to put it together, revealing this little hole in the middle, which I found all the more beautiful for its scars. And it started me on this journey of looking at the concept of Japanese concept of ma, which is the term for negative space and the ultimate void between all things. This is an image of my journey towards the top of Bingafi. At the top, you can just see the stake that I walk to as I get closer. My breathing becomes more labored, it's quite steep. And as I focus on my breathing, it really gives me time to think about all the things that I enjoy thinking about. And that's when I think about ideas for my creative practice. The hole in the pot reminded me of this hole in the stake, the rusty stake, which has an omnidirectional gaze out onto the landscape. So whereas the hidden interior of the pot became visible through its broken piece, all of a sudden this eye, as I refer to it, opens out onto the landscape. And the image on the right denotes the space between the stake and the satellite tower, which I refer to as phenomenescence, kind of made up word that really explains my recovery between the stake and the tower before I continue on my onward journey. What became apparent whilst I was in lockdown was not knowing how long it would be and whether I'd have access to the studio. And so I started to think about how some of the things that we see suddenly come into focus through the lens of the pandemic in particular. And so I started on a series of satellite dishes. I started with one we had in the field rusting and decaying, and ended up with 27 after a call out on Facebook. And so along with copper experiments, I took these out into the landscape to photograph. But I've selected a series of images that have a relationship with the landscape and with each other. And part of that revelation is sometimes when you're out in the landscape, a light dusting of snow can make more apparent things that are already there, but hidden in plain sight. So these disused peat banks with a light dusting of snow suddenly become more apparent. This, for me, is an example of that vulnerability and fragility in nature, where this leaf, the broadleaf docken, is food for the green dock beetle, and its skeletal beauty is laid bare by nature's hand. The series of images that I've selected show this bioremediation, which serves to soften the landscape, but slowly but surely consuming these discarded pieces of metal which litter the landscape from peat cutting and fencing and all the other things that take place. One of the effects of bringing light to dark places is showing standing in the peat banks and being able to see, even though this is deep holes to the sky, and whilst the water that collects in the tracks after periods of rain is great for migrant birds, the downside of that is that the ditches used to drain the peat banks also become death traps to animals who can't get any purchase on the bottom because the sides are too steep. And we're also left with the detritus left by human intervention. Preparing the satellite dishes was interesting because it gave them a voice, and showing them in an altered context made the rather familiar, everyday and ordinary elevated into something more sublime. And this is a series of images which show the textures of the satellite dishes after I've taken an angle grinder to them. Distorted images also became a focus of mine through the lens of the pandemic, where life just seemed that little bit different. The context of these is a series of convex mirrors placed out in the landscape, which gave me an altered way of seeing things. More textures and surfaces related to lines, textures and pattern found in things like icy puddles, which appealed to me. And again, use of different materials to explore that relationship with the landscape and with things that populate it. Evidenced here in my copper pieces and more of the distorted mirror. Again, ice on puddles and my dishes out in the bay at dusk reveal interesting shadows and reflections. And this fragility of this seed head with rain, I thought was reminiscent of the pitted surface of a dish just caught in evening light. Salt-laden wood reveals interesting lines and patterns and textures, and also those abiotic rhythms that you find on the seabed when the tide goes out a long way. And this shows some of the images that you can get when it's really calm. It doesn't happen very often, but when the wind drops, these images appear and disappear in the moment, in an instant, really. And this is a recreation using plywood and mosaic mirror tiles to reflect the sky. Exploring relationships through scale and form. Again, more pieces in resin and in wood. And this image is on the right is one of the images used actually in the exhibition. The degree show installation was a culmination of all these things, and we were able to use the studio, which was great. I suspended the dishes with a series of motion sensors, both to capture my breathing and some of the poetry that has been instrumental in bringing ideas to fruition. And the lighting is also on motion sensor, and you get this sense of the layered view, shadows and reflections, which I particularly enjoy. These are the two images currently on show in the exhibition, and I like the relationship between these two pieces. And the whole degree show became a series of conversations, and the poetry that you can hear in the whispered motion sensors becomes Here, this is the place where sky and sea form the edge of my conscious self, as waves gush forth to caress these shores with unfurling secrets on frothy lips. Until you found me, I was awake yet asleep, brought into being on the breath of winnowing grasses and the quiet roar of whispering tides. You speak to me without words about things I already knew and yet did not know, liberated on the drumming wings of courting snipe and the whirring murmuration of starlings. And I begin to see with senses attuned to seeing what my eyes alone cannot see. And that concludes my presentation. I'd just like to say a big thank you to all those who made this possible. Thank you very much.
My name's Theo Wilkins-Lang. I studied fine photography at the Glasgow School of Art, still based in Glasgow. My project, the thesis project for my degree, and also the work I'm showing in FUTUREPROOF in street level, is called We Others, and it's a series of large-scale portraits, about 1 meter in height, 1.5 meters, just under 1 meter in width, so quite large, all analog darkroom prints, shot on large format. And I wanted to start by saying that because the process of making, for me, is really very kind of, it's where a lot of my work comes from. I sort of, this project, for sure, definitely came from just playing around with large format, getting the opportunity to print at a large scale. And, you know, just by doing that, that's kind of, it revealed to me an interest in making this work, these portraits. And then kind of following from that, my whole practice is, I guess I could maybe say, is kind of about this sort of trying to apprehend the photographic object and the photographic subject. What is this object? Who is it? When you take a photo of someone, you know, who is it? I've been taking pictures for 8-9 years, and I've got I've always had this kind of I guess like ceaseless frustration with you know, I have these objects, these photographs, and you know, but you know, what is it? It's not a person, it's not the thing itself, it's not the, but it's not a it is also kind of the person, you know, it's a trace or an impression, but it doesn't look like the person. So anyways, I've always been kind of struggling. I guess I wouldn't say struggling because I love doing it. I love the kind of struggle with it, but kind of trying to grapple with the object and what it is. Apprehend, that's like I said, that's the word that really kind of, for me, is kind of sums up how I approach the work. So the title, We Others, comes from an essay by the critic, philosopher, Jean-Luc Nancy. I can't pronounce any French words, so I won't really try very hard. The essay is called New Autre, something like that. I mean, that is what it's called, but again, can't really pronounce French. I've never been able to. And that means We Others, and it's an essay that he wrote for an exhibition, I believe, in Spain, but I might be wrong on that. And it's sort of him trying to understand what the photograph is, and he approaches it in sort of literary terms, or not literary, like linguistic kind of terms. And he talks about you know, the taking the photograph. And I should specify as well, taking the photograph of a person. You know, I think for him, he's not as interested, at least in this essay, in landscape, or then, you know, to me, there's something in terms of what I like making, the subject, the person is such this interesting thing for me. So I suppose I share that. But then, so he talks about how the act of creating photography, of creating an image of another person, is what he calls sort of like an enunciation. So it's, you know, it's saying I am, and what he goes on to say is that I am, when you say I am, you also imply that you're other from everybody else. So I am other from everyone else who can say I am, I think is the quote, which I thought was a fascinating idea. And then he applies that to photography. And there's a quote, I did find this quote in very kind of continental philosophy babble. Photography is a monster with two subjects, with a double body, human, and a single cavernous head whose one eye blinks on and off. So I love that. I love that idea. I mean, that kind of makes it sound very monstrous and, you know, sinister almost. But this idea that there's this camera, and for those who don't know, a large format camera, which is what I made the work on, it's a big, you know, a big beast of a camera. The old ones where you put the hood over your head and kind of do all that stuff. So you know, when I was making this work in the beginning, and I talked about this image is actually the first image that I took for the project. And I was making this work and I was thinking like, wow, like this is so strange. This whole thing is so strange, but it's such a, and this is sort of what Nancy was talking about. It's this very like, I don't know, it feels like I'm kind of almost doing like this sort of humanist act, you know, that I'm, you know, and as he said, it's a monster with two subjects, this, you know, a double body and this, you know, strange mechanical eye in the center. So I was thinking about that when I was making this work, and I was working a lot on my dissertation about the photographic object and trying to understand what it is, especially in the context of, you know, after modernism and after the kind of, you know, abstraction of the mediums and all that stuff. And I was thinking, okay, so, you know, all these ideas, you know, all this, you know, I'm making this kind of very traditional work, but I've also got this kind of, you know, this strange feeling of, I don't know if you can have a feeling of humanism. I'm not sure what the right way to put that would be. The right way to put that would be, but I thought that, you know, all these things in my head, and I kind of went back to my younger days, I suppose, when my real strong interest in existentialism, and I remember in first year I had this whole thing where I was like, I want to bring my philosophical interests, you know, Sartre and Camus, into photography, but how do you, you know, how do you do that? I don't even know. And I was really, you know, and I sort of then kind of gave that up, and I went off in second and third year and went and kind of played around with a lot of other ideas, made a lot of very religious work. I'm not a religious person, but I was raised around religion, and so I made a lot of this religious work. And so then kind of, I guess, primed myself for coming back in fourth year, and I, you know, trying to pondering all these topics and what the photographic object is and the subject and all that. And I had this sudden like kind of shock of like, well, you know, why am I making these pictures? What is the reason? And I don't know if it's a good enough reason. I don't know if it has to have a reason, but, you know, I think as an artist, you always have to push yourself to, you know, ask, well, why am I actually doing this? You know, what's the point? And I thought, okay, well, all these ideas kicking around my head, and then thinking about that existentialism that I tried to import into photography. And I sort of realized at one point, you know what, I think what I'm trying to do is be some sort of like propagandist of existentialism. You know, and I think that was a really big moment for me. And yeah, I think, if that makes sense, this kind of idea of creating these two subjects unified by the camera's presence, distinct but together. And there's another bit from Nancy. Each one affirms each we other, each I am, each subject, each body affirms its alterity, while both together make the request for an identity distinct from every other, in whose distinction they're absorbed into one another, one by the other. So like this sort of, you know, we are distinct, but we are unified by this this kind of thing, this object, this photographic object. I was really fascinated by that, that kind of revelation of, you know, I'm creating these others. And I, you know, I had this whole, I think from there, I had this whole kind of like, all right, this is what I have to do. You know, I have to make this propaganda of existentialism, you know, of these others, you know, of this kind of, and, you know, if any of that makes any sense, I'm still not sure if it makes sense to me. And as I always say, sometimes I have a tendency to talk about all these ideas, to try and get away with just enjoying making pictures of people and printing them really big. So I'm kind of swindling everyone in a way. But so, you know, I suppose, I guess in summary, there's a lot of things that go into the work that I put into it, that kind of helps me understand why I make it. But I think in its essentiality, I'm not sure if that's how you say that word. I'm American, so, you know, I don't know how to pronounce anything. I can't really speak proper English. You know, but in its essentialness, it is, it just comes from a love of, you know, making these others, you know, of making them sort of, you know, tangible and real, and also not at the same time. Yeah. And that's all I kind of have to say right now about the work. We'll see what happens in the future. You know, in a couple of years, I might look back and think that was a dumb idea. I just like taking pictures of people. So that's me. Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Spencer Dent. I study fine art photography at Glasgow School of Art. So the work that's shown in the FUTUREPROOF 2022 exhibition sort of started in first year for me. So I did this work, like a sort of whole series around sort of like this, and it was about archetypes of gender and stuff like that. But I didn't really like it that much. I thought it didn't feel very nuanced, and I sort of did one or two sort of versions of it, and then just it sort of fizzled out. And then when I was coming towards the end of third year and fourth year, I sort of remembered this work and remembered like my interest in it. And I made like a lot of different works throughout uni that was sort of kind of jumped around. I didn't focus too much on one idea. And then I came back around to this original idea that was like kind of the first thing I did at uni. So it's sort of quite full circle. But when I came back to it in fourth year or the end of third year, I kind of realized I wanted to look more at the in-betweens of gender. So rather than looking at like the like men and women, or, you know, male and female, or masculine and feminine, I wanted to look at that sort of in-between space, because I kind of had developed that interest over the 4 years. So I started reading and researching into gender and clothing and the body and stuff like that, and how gender is signified through your body and through clothing, and how someone reads or interprets someone's gender. And it sort of got me onto this idea of like genderlessness. So like my idea basically was to create a series of self-portraits where I use like hair, makeup, costume to conceal and distort my face and body, to make it harder for the reader to discern like the gender of the figure in the portrait, or like confusing for them to work out. I'd also been looking a lot at Zanel Maholi's work. So this kind of whole series that they'd done inspired a lot of like the aesthetic choices I made, and also like the kind of just the whole idea of this like dressing up and this transformation. I think that was one thing that I was really interested in with their work, is like this transformation. They look like a different person in every picture, and they just use like household object stuff that they just like find around to make these costumes that they seem really, I don't know, just really well thought out and yeah, transformative. I guess that was like the main interest for me. A lot of the thinking I was doing when I was looking at the designing the costumes and the makeup and the hair was about symmetry and asymmetry. So some of the reading I'd done basically talked about how, you know, symmetry is like a biological thing or a neurological thing where it's something that to do with attractiveness. So if someone is more symmetrical, then they're more attractive because it's something to do with like health, and if you're more symmetrical, your brain thinks that they're healthier, stuff like that. So your children will be healthier or something like that. But I thought that was really interesting. So I wanted to look a lot at symmetry, and you can see in some of the ones here, I kind of played with the shape of the costume and like having like it sort of lopsided. So like one side was more weighted than the other, or things were just completely unevenly placed. And I think part of that as well was my interest in like, you know, masculinizing, don't know, or feminizing like a body or a face. So like particularly feminizing, so it's like kind of in at the waist, out at the hip sort of thing, and you wanted like a particular shape. So I kind of wanted to take anything that was said about that and kind of flip it. So like you can see that one in the bottom right, instead of going in at the waist, it's going out as far as it can, or like the top one on the right on the top, the second one on the top is sort of like it goes in and out, but at such a low level that it's like, I don't know, kind of distorted shape. Yes, and then you can see those interests are sort of carried on in the makeup design as well. So there's a lot of asymmetry, like things going up and down, or like lopsided, or kind of like random shapes on the face. But I was also really interested with the face and kind of changing the movement of the facial features. So rather than having, you know, when you think about makeup, a lot of it is like up for like women. It's like you're trying to, you know, feminize the face or lift your face kind of like this. So I did a lot of stuff where it's sort of dragging it down or pinching it all into the center of the face, like that the top right one there. And yeah, pulling the eyes down, I thought it was like a really interesting look because it's sort of like the opposite of what you usually do in makeup. Yeah, and then also symmetry as well, like that's in it. So then once I'd taken all the photos, I designed the looks, gotten in them, taken them, blah, blah, blah. I had to decide how I wanted to print them. So that was like a big part of the process for me as well, was working out what sort of printing process kind of aided the images in the way that I kind of felt like helped them look good, basically, and sort of get across the concept or point that I was trying to get across. So I did loads of different stuff. I did like darkroom prints with digital negatives because they were originally digital images. I did cyanotypes, risographs. I did, you know, screen prints eventually. Obviously, I did like MFD prints. I did, got loads of different stuff. I don't know, probably other stuff as well. And then that one on the bottom right, probably other than the thing I ended up doing, was like my favorite one. So it was a exposed but undeveloped cyanotype that I scanned in a digital scanner and then did a digital print of it. So it's like this, again, this in-between stage where it's like it's developed, but it's not been processed. So it's kind of like in this weird limbo. And I thought that was like, that would aid the concept as well, because obviously I'm looking at the in-between of gender. So this in-between state of the print kind of I thought was quite interesting, but I didn't end up going with that. So I ended up doing screen printing, obviously. Screen printing onto PVC specifically, I guess. And I wanted to do a sort of analog printing process for ages at uni, but they were quite tight with the induction. So I eventually got a screen printing one and did some stuff onto paper, did some stuff onto like canvas and stuff. And then one of my friends had done this print onto the material I ended up using. And I was like, that is like the perfect thing I'm looking for. I think I had a tutorial and they mentioned something about latex, and then latex was kind of a whole thing. It's also like kind of a health and safety thing because people have allergies. So yeah, ended up going with the PVC. And I thought that worked in that in-between thing as well, because it's translucent, or yeah, translucent. So it's not opaque, but it's not transparent. It's got this like fogginess to it. So the image seems to kind of float. And I like that sort of, yeah, in between. I felt like it aided the concept quite well if I'm looking at the in between of gender. So yeah. So yeah, that's this was the final work. So this is it shown at street level. And yeah, you can see where asymmetry and this sort of like lopsidedness kind of comes in. I mean, some of them are symmetrical, like the last two, I'd say like pretty much symmetrical, but in the way where they're still like, you know, covering the whole body, and it's still this idea of like a strange kind of ungendered shape. Yeah, so that's kind of how that all sort of came together. And then the steel frames, so like the PVC is stretched over these steel frames, which, I mean, it kind of came about because of sort of a logistical thing. Like I needed to work out a way to frame them or like hang the prints. Like I have these PVC prints, and it's like, well, how am I going to show them? And I think someone in my, I saw a work online of someone who'd done printed fabric onto these like, printed images onto this like sheer fabric, and then had it on these like black frames. So you could like see the frame underneath. I thought it was interesting, like the border. So what I did is I made the print exactly to the size of the inside of the frame. So when I stretched it over, the print sits right, like the edge of the print sits right on the beginning of the steel frame, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I just thought the steel was like an interesting material to have with the PVC. It's this kind of like, they sort of feel like industrial in a way. And then also I liked how, they kind of float, on the PVC that feels quite delicate, and this foggy PVC. And then the steel is quite like a hard, harsh material. And you have the, the exposed corners where it's been sanded down. Yeah, so that's that. And then, so after, that was my degree show. And then after that, my work has sort of carried on in a similar interest, but it's changed a bit. So rather than looking specifically at gender, I'm looking more at ambiguous shape and form as a more broad topic. So some of it is to do with gender, but some of it isn't. Some of it's more like visual based in a way. Like I'm exploring lots of different mediums, lots of different kind of techniques to try it, but all talking about the one broad theme. And I guess in the future, my idea would be to like show them all together at the same time. I like the idea of having a really eclectic show with loads of different mediums. So this is something I did on the Glasgow Glasgow Project Room in Trongate 103, also in the same building as Street Level. It was a residency I had that I got from Degree Show, and this was based actually off of a design from the previous work, the 6 self-portraits, and it was like the back of it, and I scanned it in, and it had this really sketchy quality I liked. So got these 2 stretchers made just before I left uni, and then stretched them and used like a jumbo oil stick and sort of just sketched the shape in. And I left one of them unfinished because I finished one of them and then had a picture of it halfway through and sort of liked it a bit more. So did it again, but left it unfinished this time. Yeah, and I liked the kind of like, I felt it feels like a sort of progression, because it's sort of like, together, slightly finished, and then least finished kind of one. And then this is some excerpts, like screenshots from a video piece I'm doing at the moment. It's sort of like an ongoing thing. I'm just shooting sort of random shots of things that I feel like are ambiguous in shape and form. This is kind of where the idea for the rest of the stuff came from, because I've been shooting it for a while, and I'm hoping to eventually, I haven't finished the tape yet, hoping to finish the tape and then cut it together into a short kind of like 1-2 minute film, and maybe make some sound stuff for it as well, but we'll see. Then this is another thing I shot on the Glasgow Project Room residency, but ended up not being able to develop it until like December, like the film until like December, I think, yeah, December. And this is, same idea, but I don't remember really where I got this idea from. I think like years ago I saw a YouTube video of someone using the magic plastic stuff that was like, plastic in a tube and you can blow it into a balloon. And I had like a screenshot of it, and I found it like kind of while I was doing the residency. So I thought that'd be interesting to do. So yeah, it's like I've got a whole series of these that I'm hoping to, print and get framed. I'm thinking about printing them onto like a sheer fabric, and I have some steel frames left over from the other thing. I'm thinking I'm gonna stretch them over that. I've got some like individual ones, and then this is a group one. So I'm just working out how I want to show it basically. And then this is like the final slide, but it's this is, I was on the Isle of Arran, and loads of dead jellyfish is like washed up on the beach. I don't know why, but maybe it was just like the season for jellyfish to die. I'm not really sure. But so this, I just took this on my phone actually. I have a whole bunch of these, and I've just recently got them printed and framed. So hoping to, I've got 2 that I've printed and framed. I'm hoping to show them at something soon. I don't really know what. I'm going to try and submit them to some stuff basically, but yeah, following the same idea, ambiguous shape and form. I like the idea that you can't really work out what it is when you look at it. Like no one so far, I think, has guessed what it is just from the first look. And then when I explain, they're like, oh yeah, I see that, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I like the idea, kind of with all of that, the new work, that it's sort of, people don't really understand necessarily exactly what they're looking at. I think that's quite interesting. Yeah, so that's the end of my talk.
I'm Abby Pryce. I'm a photographer from Glasgow. I studied at City of Glasgow College for about 4 years, graduated last year from the BA Honours, and this is a wee bit into my graduation project. So just want to start off by saying thank you so much to Street Level for including me in this like amazing exhibition full of so many talented people. So it's like a big honour. Yeah, I'm just going to talk a wee bit about my work. The themes I wanted to explore in this big project were kind of varied. I'd say it was a very personal one, so there's that, but also there's themes of like identity, body positivity, self-love, stuff like that. So yeah, what I'm trying to channel through the work basically was I wanted to investigate this kind of thought I had where I was like, it started off as a reaction. I was scrolling through Instagram, like fed up of all the kind of over polished, like curated stuff I was seeing, and I just felt so fed up of it. And then that got me thinking on like authenticity and stuff when it comes to body image, how we all have so many things we hate about ourselves, so many things that are deemed flaws, but they're perfectly natural. This got me thinking about how these natural elements connect to nature in a way, because there's so much represented visually that I could connect with the two. So I started thinking deeper on that, and I basically started spiraling from there. I was like, there's a visual connection I want to explore, but also like a more emotional one in terms of how we as people also feel within nature, like the effect it has on us, not just the visual comparisons. And this actually turned into a bit of like therapy for myself when it came to like self-acceptance within my body and stuff. Like as a young woman, all you see is like over curated, like polished, perfect photoshopped images online, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're not seeing that back. So I really used this as a bit of a self-acceptance thing, really. So basically I started just taking photos of like a lot of things. I started doing like portraits, parts of the body, as you can see, nature, landscapes, like macro photography of skin, macro photography of like trees, like flowers, leaves, all that. And I came to the conclusion I had this big body of work, like this, like basically loads of images. In my head, they all curated together and formed this similar thing I was exploring, but there was no visual connection at the time. It was all over the place. And as I say, there was the visual element of comparing the two. So like you can look and see, oh yeah, there is an actual similarity there, but I wanted to convey emotionally as well how I was feeling at the time. So then after quite a lot of talks with my mentor, Robert Henderson, who's amazing, his advice was like invaluable. I came to the conclusion that it was like an emotional response I was going for. So with work together, like side by side, even though it might not straight away correlate in your head as going together, it's like they bounce off each other and create an emotional reaction. It might not be a good one. It might be like you're grossed out or you're confused, whatever, but that was the main focus for me. So yeah, I was fascinated to see how they went together. Like there was model shots and stuff next to like big close-ups of skin and scars and stuff, and I was really playing about with this effect. So this is my final few images, the final presentation at street level, and I really like how it turned out because I feel like it conveys the two elements of what I was focusing on and brings them together. So there's yeah, the two elements really. The big picture on the left is obviously a model shot, but it's not skin retouched, edited or anything like that as to fully embrace this. But the whole theme of it is she is like embracing her natural body, embracing everything about it, her skin, blemishes, the lot, and she's feeling good about it. She's surrounded by nature and she's just soaking it in. She feels calm, she feels like one with all of it. And the other square images on the right are these more close-up abstract photos I was going for. Like I wanted the display, you're immersed within the model image, like you feel what she's feeling, it's there. But with these square ones, I wanted it to be more of a investigation. You have to kind of go up, look at them, really get a feel for what it is. So I played about with different editing techniques and stuff, made them a bit abstract looking. You can't quite tell what it is at first glance, but those are tree branches and stretch marks. So yeah, you need to kind of go up and have a look. You might not know what it is at first. And yeah, that was my kind of goal for the whole thing. This is the street level presentation, final look. Turned out really, really well. Yeah. So lost my train of thought. Yeah, I think that's it, to be honest. That was the whole project. It was pretty much just started as a reaction to something else, but developed into more of like a love letter to nature and a love of natural skin, natural beauty, all of that. And I'm really happy with the effects it's had on me personally and also people involved. Thanks.
So I'm Natalie Dawson. I am a landscape and kind of documentary photographer, but landscape's my predominant kind of practice. I studied at the Glasgow School of Art and I studied communication design with the photography pathway. So my kind of background with photography is kind of slightly more kind of design side rather than the kind of fine art side, and learning kind of where those kind of the differences are, but I think my process seems to be slightly more comme des than kind of when I've spoken to fine artists. I've always been interested in landscape, just kind of looking at form and pattern and stuff within the landscape, and that's kind of where my interest is. My project is called, that's the exhibition, just as a reminder. It's called As Far As Half the Time Left, and it's about a journey that I took through the Yorkshire Dales, and it was a journey that, so my dad passed away when I was 13, and he was from Yorkshire and he always wanted to take me here, and I never got that chance to take that journey with him. So I kind of wanted to do this project to kind of I don't know, explore the kind of relationship I have with kind of the experience of like losing him or not having him there. And it's not necessarily kind of about grief, it's kind of more about kind of memory, and like, I don't know, it's kind of encompasses a few different things. It was like the first like proper landscape project I did, so I think throughout doing it I was kind of really learning like what my process was as a photographer. I was writing my dissertation at the same time, and it was really helpful for kind of like figuring out what I was, but a lot of it I started off by using like multiple cameras, and I was just kind of like assessing what was like good for me. So I always knew I wanted to do a book, and I think that was my way of kind of sequencing everything and kind of putting it together in my head. I think that's where the Comdes thing background kind of comes in. I think I'm quite graphicsy in like the way I think, and yes, that's kind of where I kind of started from. And then so my process like involves a lot of walking, and that was one of the things I explored and kind of read a lot about. I think there's something really interesting when you kind of go into these landscapes and your senses are just all over the place, and how your brain kind of changes as you keep walking. Like you kind of get into that like flow and rhythm, and I found that like after these long walks, like different thoughts were kind of coming up and like different memories. And I think I was kind of looking into a lot of like symbolism within the landscape and what that kind of meant for the situation that I'd been in and like was in the past, and how those kind of two things like interlinked. Was something I found quite interesting. But yeah, symbolism was like quite big. I was like looking into a lot of like kind of psychology and Jungian theory, and Jung kind of talks about how we have these very specific like markers that mean something to us. And like this image, for example, I think it's strange. I took this and I really liked it, and then also other people really connected with it, and I was always kind of like, oh, I wonder why, because it's kind of so simple as like an image, but I think it is because it's, for me, this like represents kind of a wholeness and like I think throughout the book I wanted to get this kind of like cycle of something going through, because it was about a process and like a journey, and I think this might be the reason why this image kind of resonated for a lot of people. I used like 35mm and medium format for this project, and then I also made this decision to use black and white and colour. I think the camera thing, was happy with how the images came out. I wouldn't necessarily use both again. I think I would just stick to medium format. Part of it was that I was just kind of experimenting, and I liked that way of doing it. But the colour in black and white was like a very like definite thing for me, because I read this book. It's called I Walk Towards the Sun, Even Though It's Always Going Down, and it has colour in black and white, and I hadn't seen that in a photography book before, and I found it really interesting because I felt like it was flicking between the reality and the memory and like the real and the kind of unreal, and I enjoy that as a metaphor for my project, because I was really there, but I think I was also in the past, like my head was in the past. So the black and white images tend to be a lot more realistic, and then the color ones are really, really abstract. And I think I was kind of playing with the fact that, I mean, we tend to see color as the more like real thing, but I wanted color to be the more kind of like unreal thing. And just was a very like thing for me that was like important within the project, that had color and black and white, which at the time I think was probably a bit of a risk. I remember my tutor being like, oh, but I'm glad that I did it. And then for the book, I had like a lot of note pages in it. I wrote at the end of each day, and so the writing became a really important part of the like process for me. And I really just wanted to keep it very crisp and like rhythmic. So I did 7 walks in total, and I split those in the book. I mean, bit of creative license within some of it, but I tend, in each like set of 7, I would have a note page at the end, and I'd have color image within it as well, just to keep, like, I think because it is already complicated, I needed it to kind of be a lot simple. And within like the writing is how I came to the title, because I kind of was thinking a lot about like kind of the journey and the process of it. And I obviously it was winter, like the landscape's very bleak, it gets dark early, and so I'd be very careful about how far I'd walk. So I came across, like, I wrote this line that was like, I walk as far as half the time left. So I'd only walk as far, so if say I had 4 hours, I'd only walk as far as 2, and so I'd have time to get back. And I think, I don't know why that felt like it really resonated with the project. I think it felt like I needed to keep myself in like this safe place, and you can only push yourself as far. And I think that relates a lot to kind of like the grief process, and even like life in general. You kind of can only really go so far, if that makes sense. And yeah, like, this is the last image that I had in the book, the final image in the project, and I think this is like the one that's like kind of has the most meaning for me in the project. So I wanted the whole project to go full circle, so I wanted the ending to feel like a start. For me, like, dew is always simple, like I always remember dew in the mornings, and I wanted it to be like this kind of fresh, crisp, like I never wanted this book to feel bleak. I feel like I can be very melancholic with the way I work, and I want to overdo it. So I wanted it to kind of end on like a bit of a like happier note. And also, my dad was from a town called Dewsbury in Yorkshire, and I also found that as a really interesting thing to like. I went there for a day as well. There is one image in the book of it. It's very abstract, but I think that was really important to me to have like this kind of full circle and finish at this, like finish at the start. But yeah, I think that's everything I have to say. I hope that was okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for including my work in the FUTUREPROOF 2022 exhibition, and just thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk about my work as well. My name is Denise Delaunay-Wood, and I am a Scottish-American documentary style photographer. I've been living in Aberdeen, Scotland for 24 years with my Scottish husband, and I recently graduated from Robert Gordon's University Gray School of Art in the contemporary art practice last year. Let's see, why isn't this loud? Oh, there we go. Just earlier, just kind of give you a little bit of my research. Sally Mann's always been a very influential photographer in my work. I've been latterly, excuse me, Larry Sultan, who is an American photographer. He photographed his parents, very influential. Colin Gray, British photographer, was also very influential in the work that I was doing. My practice is basically revolves around themes of like the home and family. Also really kind of more interested in the aging as well, and touching on themes of like isolation, loss, and identity issues, which sometimes accompany aging. These are just earlier print pictures that I took of my in-laws on the left there, and my dad. Just going to show a couple just of the just 2 of the earlier ones, but this is my father-in-law, very much influenced by Larry Sultan. He took a picture of his dad in his bed. So this is my father-in-law on his. This one was exhibited in the Portrait of Britain too, which I was really proud about. Again, this one was my father-in-law, and this one was very much influenced by Colin Gray's picture that I showed earlier. And this is where I kind of got interested in transitions that we kind of face in our life. As my father-in-law got older, sometimes as we get older, we become more introspective, or maybe not as participating, as more, this is all of his family around him. He's got 3 generations there. And it just really struck me, as in these kind of transitions that we go through in life, some of them are very widely documented, like adolescence and motherhood or parenthood, very well documented. But aging, midlife, not so much so. And it's kind of, I guess, in this, I wrote my dissertation on the lack of representation of women of a certain age, and we kind of just get an invisibility, kind of drop off the visual arts and the media. It's kind of where this began. This now is into my my degree work, coming out of, you know, like we all did, coming out of some rough years. We had kind of our own transitions, I found myself in my own transition, I guess. All my usual suspects of who I used to photograph were gone. And we had a lot of changes happening in our home. So I was just kind of really challenged at this point with my creative process, and photographing really, probably now in retrospect, how I was feeling, and just kind of my environment really. Became really fascinated with these feathers, really kind of resonated, made me think of the feather once having a very defined role, very clear purpose, very needed at one point, and then at some point was no longer needed, was discarded, and kind of became entrapped in these branches. And at that point, that really resonated with me. So, but equally, you know, it was still beautiful in its own right. Also started to point the camera at my marriage, and started to look at different aspects of that. So this is a picture of my husband and I. Also experimenting with self-portraiture for the first time. Did a lot of it. This was really the only picture that I included in my work, because it really kind of fit the narrative. And all the while, as I was doing the work, my dad let me document the last 6 months of his life. And those pictures were kind of always in the background of my mind. And I started to actually start to edit them, and really wanted to incorporate them in my degree work, and kind of started to look at maybe the universal pull maybe that they have. Just, you know, it's not a very well documented time of life, certainly not, you know, the aging process or end life. And I just kind of saw the universality of it, as we all will face our mortality. So this is my dad and my daughter walking through the door. I'll kind of go through these quicker. This one is exhibited. This is one is of my mom getting her hair cut. So my dad was in the back room, and there was life obviously happening in the rest of the house. So this was just really me documenting a point in time in the house of kind of what was going on. There were still some great moments, some great happy times, which also reminds me of, you know, this kind of push and pull, or the joy and pain is living kind of side by side in life always. This was a picture in the garage where we kind of would come out and just get away from the house. A mealtime, quite chaotic. We had, I think, about 12 people in a 2-bedroom house. I like this one because my mom's there in the center. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and she is kind of isolated, but in her own kind of world as she's eating. Just some detailed shots of my dad's place where he sat, his hearing aids, his paper, and he used to write notes every morning. Do not resuscitate, order on the refrigerator, and his medication. Another part in the living room, my kids putting on face masks. My dad used to love to read his Bible on his Kindle. He got to a point where he couldn't do that anymore, so he'd ask my 2 daughters to read to him. This one's probably one of my favorite ones, is just the sunflower. Obviously, it's kind of not looking that great. It's at the end of its life cycle. It was very representation of what was going on in the house with my mom and dad in the background. Whoop. More playful moment. My dad playing with his great-grandson with the puppets that he'd gotten for the great-grandson that my dad he got for Christmas. And then a more intimate moment with Caesar, his great-grandson, in the foreground, and my dad sleeping in the back. And this was just a detailed shot of my dad's back. I really loved my dad's back. It was very moly, very spotty, very unique. Had these creases here, which when he stood, you know, it was just a very unique back. I just really wanted to document that. And I also was doing kind of coming outside the house, started to experiment with the underwater camera. Very interested in kind of what's beneath the surface. And I'm still kind of progressing with that project, but this is of my mom. And included this one because it's very reminiscent of my childhood. It's a very playful photograph. I grew up with a pool in my backyard. We were in the pool playing a lot. And this one just really was, had that same retrospective feeling of kind of in my childhood as well. I'll just go back to that. In retrospect, when I look back at these photographs, I really can see, at the time I didn't really appreciate what I was, I knew I was documenting a moment in time, but I also kind of felt my camera became a mediator between what was really going on. It was much easier for me to be behind the camera, documenting what was happening than to kind of face the situation head on and be fully present. And I've noticed through this year that my camera does it a lot for me. So it brings me a lot of joy in a hard world sometimes. This is my degree show as I exhibited it. I was very much knew I didn't want to be in a linear kind of display. Chose my sizes A1, A3, A5. Really wanted to pull the viewer in and have him stand back and look at the work as a whole. Just really wanted to kind of have that push and pull with the viewer. I included books that I had done of the work and kind of work around it. I again included the Viewmasters as very much my very favorite toy as a childhood. So that I just remember that. I made my own images and put them in the reels. And that was my project. And currently I've got an exhibition coming up at the Royal Scottish Academy in 2024, which I'm excited about. And I've got two projects here, neither here nor there, in the 80s project. These are just working prints, kind of what I'm working on now, just looking more at the self-portraiture and the underwater aspects. And then the 80s projects is photographing people over 80 or 80 and over in their homes. And yeah, so that's me. It's all my contact details. If you'd like to get in touch, I'd love to hear from you. If you know anyone who wants to be a part of the 80s project, please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. So thank you.
So hi, my name is Aiste, and I'm an artist practicing in photography, moving image, and performance art. I'm a recent graduate of BA Honours in Fine Art Photography at Glasgow School of Art, and currently I am based in Paris. The project Naked Form that is being currently exhibited at FUTUREPROOF exhibition in Glasgow at Street Level Photoworks Gallery has started in 2020, my interest into the naked form with a project called Dualism Exploration that is a multidisciplinary performance piece. And it's a collaboration with a classical pianist, Dorothy Dowinskita. I used a slide projector to project self-portraits on the naked body, while at the same time, Dorothy was improvising and musically reflecting what she was seeing in front of her from visual part. It's a very complex and multi-layered project, and it's available to be viewed. To view it on either on my artist webpage or Vimeo account. So Naked Form is an ongoing photographic project, which is entirely processed with cathinol, and the frames that I use to frame them that are hanging in the gallery are handpicked from the local charity shop. Initially, it has been shown in Glasgow School of Art, a final degree show last year, and it consists from 10 photographs and one handwritten poem that are photographs of my partner and self-portraits. So initially it was supposed to be, the idea for Naked Form was to work with women artistically as an artistic collaboration for them posing in front of the camera naked. And the collection, the selection that is shown is I picked, they were initially test shoots, and then eventually they became their own thing. What I did during these test shoots, I wanted to put myself, because as a woman, I wanted to know and experience what it is like to be in front of the camera, and what challenges I would face, because I was going to be all the time behind the camera, and also it's very apparent in the selection of images the feministic concepts. I also used focus to blur out certain parts of the image to kind of create abstract shapes of the body, not necessarily looking like a body, it's just kind of abstract imagination of the shapes in the frame, and kind of testing ideas how they transform into the image. And eventually, this whole selection of images, as I mentioned, became its own thing, and it really set off to me for this project as the point of the beginning, because it's a collection of intimate and personal photographs of me and my surroundings, which were also developed kind of at home, all in my personal space. So I feel like I began from me this, and now I can continue with women. So yes, this is about the naked form, and I plan to continue working on it. The biggest inspirations for this project were women photographers, Francesca Woodman and Mona Kuhn. And I included also a couple of unedited scans from naked form that haven't been shown anywhere yet. Here, which you can view. And my future plans at the moment are, I'm currently working on an exhibition in Paris with, together with my friend Joanna Stavnitska, who's also showing her work at FUTUREPROOF in Edinburgh at Stills Gallery. And also I'm in the process of creating a book cover with a writer in Canada.
Hello, I'm Danielle Haynes. I graduated from City Glasgow College with a BA Honours in photography. I'm a neurodivergent mixed media photographic artist. I use a wide variety of mediums and techniques within my work, but always start with or implement photographs or photographic processes throughout. My practice explores themes of identity and connections, in particular, how we're connected to each other and the world. And I'm fascinated with the things that we can and can't see, and like to explore the balance of both, trying to reveal more about the things we can't see, or the small details that are often overlooked but are vital to understanding a person or a part of their world in a deeper way. This and my own background has shaped my practice greatly, and I focus on working with and creating for marginalised communities, and strive to share their stories and make impact for social change, understanding and acceptance. So before I began my current project, I took part in a creative challenge over a week with the artist Brooke Shaden, where we were told to write out a list of words as they came to mind and then focus on 3 of them to create a piece of work around that. I can't remember the words that I chose. However, it culminated in me making this piece of work, which explored my journey at that point, and how I was feeling about my ADHD diagnosis. I found it helped me understand myself, and like the process of it was a lot, not easier, but it sort of helped me process it better. And I got lots of feedback from others saying that they related to it or they could see themselves in the work. So I wanted to be able to create that, or like help other people in that way through artwork, basically. I'd been spending a lot of time researching and could see that historically art created around disabilities and conditions carried a lot of stigma, as well as misrepresentation, with the creator choosing how the subject was being portrayed and seen. And it could create sort of harmful narratives and lacked the input of the subjects involved. And that was something that I wanted to challenge. It's like was really important to me that it was a collaborative process, and while making a representation of the subject, it was their voice and their words, their thoughts and experiences that was at the heart of each piece. So it all started with single portraits and interviews. So each person, I met with them and went through the same list of questions, asking them about their own journey and themselves and how they would want to be seen. And basically I chose sort of elements of that and asked them sort of what they would like to be included in the artworks as well, so that I could basically create them. Obviously, the portraits themselves sort of tie it all together in terms of something cohesive and that looks alike, but because each art piece is based on the individual, they were obviously going to look very different, and they had to look very different. And I wanted to use a variety of media to try and show the differences in each person. So I wanted to use like sound, light, textures to represent each person, and seeing the sort of each piece as a three-dimensional, moving, living, sort of vibrant mini experience rather than just flat images. So this is my first piece. It is of the picture of my son from the previous page. And basically I wanted to create something for him that he doesn't have a lot of speech, so wasn't able to take part in an interview the same. And obviously I know him really, really well. So we went sort of down the route of things that he likes to explore, and elements of things that he sort of is really, really interested in. So I wanted to make sort of a building structure, or kind of like a paper puzzle in a way, because he likes sort of building structures and he likes creating things with paper, and drawing and sort of tearing pieces of paper up and making different shapes and sort of constructing something bigger out of it. And obviously I wanted to be able to represent him and his journey in that way, and I thought that this would do that well. So basically, as it's seen together, each piece comes together and creates his face, but obviously there's a lot of outside impact to be able to do that, and it was sort of to try and convey the impact that external forces have on the way he feels and behaves and acts, and that basically I can't protect him from that, and that changes him. So that was the sort of thought process from that. And obviously people have sort of used it in different ways and built sort of constructed towers out of it, and or left it flat and had it in sort of different forms and all sort of weird and wonderful things, which has been wonderful to see. The next piece was a sort of mobile type looking structure, but I had started off thinking about a disco ball, actually, in the way that light is bounced off of a disco ball and travels around the room and all that kind of stuff. It started off again with the portrait and interview, and it's of a girl called Emily. She is very interested in music, and it's a huge part of who she is and how she understands herself. And she was at a very reflective place in her journey. She hadn't really told anyone about it, but was contemplating doing so, and it obviously a huge thing for her. So I wanted to create something that was reflective, that had lots of colour in it and shape, because that is again another sort of key part of who she is and how she expresses herself. And yeah, lots of research at sort of concerts and music venues and things like that, looking at the way that lights travelled and the shadows that they created and all that kind of stuff to create it. And I also used transparencies to obviously have the pictures of her with the shapes and the colour. For the pictures that I took from it, I wanted to try and show the different kind of properties of the transparency and the colours sort of casting, depending on the light quality and things like that. And obviously that's how it all looks together, and its space. I also created this piece as well, which is 5 different works that were all stitched. So they're all connected to embroidery hoops, and they were hand sewn and punch needled and through photographs and things like that as well. This was to represent a girl called Emma and her journey, and she was just very colourful, and she's very into punch needling and things like that. And I tried to use colour and texture as a sort of sensory element within it, to share her journey and where she's at. And yeah, everything was sort of hand sewn. The second to the left was stitched like individual sequins and beads, which took forever, but I love the sort of final outcome of it. And here's some more details of that. And basically throughout the whole project, I've been looking at different sort of mediums and things, and I'm hoping to continue that on. I'm currently looking at other processes to go through, such as cyanotypes and things like that, to try and show someone else's journey and have lots of other ones to explore.
Hi, my name is Shannon Best. I just graduated from the Glasgow School of Art in Communication Design, and I'm going to be speaking about my project Grass Above the Dead, which was shown at FUTUREPROOF at street level. This project had a range of influences, but it was heavily directed by our representations of death in art, specifically our representations of death through women in high art, and also bleeding into sort of more modern forms of media like romance movies. So a large influence for me is theatre and sort of these dynamic sets and constructed images. So you'll see a lot more of that within these slides. So alongside sort of my interest in this idea of showing a woman caught in between life and death through imagery, I was interested in sort of our connection with the earth and the cycles of life and death that are sort of prevalent in the way not only our bodies work and how we exist within the world, but also within sort of larger climate structures. I was very influenced by Gaia, who is a mythical figure in Greek mythology, and she is the primordial mother. And I was interested in using this woman, this figure, and thinking about how I could use this death imagery to show how the climate is trying to fight back against what we're doing to it, and is trying to find equilibrium, and how that equilibrium isn't sustainable for humans and would cause us to die. So it's trying to balance these two ideas of sort of death through representation, but also find a more sort of true form of death, which is cyclical and apathetic and will continue on even if we don't change. So this is just some preliminary sketches thinking about these sort of structures, how they're all linked. So on the right is an outcome I made. So another important sort of visual is Ophelia, and I was interested in her story, and I was interested in its connection to not only my theme, but also the kind of complexities within that figure in connection with the model who posed for Millet's Ophelia, Elizabeth Siddal. And she was an artist in her own right, was incredibly talented, and also incredibly self-aware, and could see where she was positioned within her role as muse within Ophelia. And she wrote a lot of poetry that was foreshadowing Ophelia's fate, and also foreshadowing her own fate, because she also committed suicide. And I was interested in this sort of mirroring, this parallel between the two figures, both Ophelia and Elizabeth Siddal, because although both can be said to have taken their own life willingly, within their taking back control, finding agency within that act, they've kind of both been painted as pathetic or without agency, something that is external that they didn't have control over. So I was interested in bringing that visual in and bringing that language from Elizabeth Siddal's poetry into the work. So that is where Grass Above the Dead comes from. That is a line from one of her poems. So here's just some process photos of me making the physical casts of my face and hands and making them look realistic. And I take these into the landscape to sort of set these two major concepts up against each other. So by placing these kind of very false but also very real objects into this setting, you get this sort of contrast of the natural with the human, but also feeling like starting to connect the human to the natural, and starting to really set up these ideas of the cycles of life and death, representation, reality. And also next to that is the glass cloche I showed with the work. And here are some more of my final outcomes, all of them sort of speaking on the same theme. Mainly the focus in this section is on representation and death through representation. This next part of the work that was shown at FUTUREPROOF is death as ritual. And I was interested in these sorts of death processes, how we treat the dead, what we do with the bodies, and how that kind of reflects on our viewpoints on death. So you think about cremation, you think about embalming. They're both processes that are trying to deny death, trying to hide death's processes. But by doing that, we're sort of reintroducing chemicals, reintroducing harmful products back into the environment. And I was interested in the fact that you know, there are other ways that we can treat bodies that actually remediate the toxins and give forth new life, which currently we don't do within sort of more Western rituals. So the idea for this was to represent that possibility of how we could treat dead bodies through a constructed image. So I made this sort of cadaver that was surrounded in a shroud, and that shroud had this skeleton leaf on it, and the idea was that the plants that would be shown growing through this leaf would show this idea of actually how our bodies are so tied to this system that we shouldn't really fight against. So this is the sort of final 3 constructed images, and this is them in the exhibition setting. I hope this was interesting. It's just a quick speed through. But yeah, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this exhibition. It was such an honour. And if you'd like to see any more of my work, there's my Instagram handle. And I'd love to talk more about this project. So if you're interested, do just let me know. Thank you so much.